Pluto is a captivating member of the solar system, but how well do you really know it? Over on my YouTube channel, I'm often asked questions about our former 9th planet, questions that other episodes about Pluto do not answer. Like, why is Pluto so hard to see from Earth when telescopes like Hubble can see distant galaxies? Why do Pluto and its moon orbit around an empty point in space? I love these sorts of questions, as the answers to them give us a fascinating insight into the way the universe works. So, if you've ever had questions about Pluto, this might just be your moment. It's time for you to get some answers. I'm Alex McCohen, and you're listening to the Astram Podcast, and I'm going to answer 3 of your top questions about Pluto. The answers to these questions will be intriguing, unique, and even emotive, but let's jump right into it. How can Hubble see distant galaxies clearly, but not Pluto? Hubble gives us breathtaking views of galaxies millions of light years away, and yet it struggles with objects much closer, like Pluto. The answer is simpler than you think. It's all about angular diameter, or how big an object in the sky. The Andromeda Galaxy, for example, is 2 million light-years away, but it's so enormous that it appears 6 times larger than the full moon in our sky. Pluto, on the other hand, is so small that its apparent size is just 0.11 arcseconds. For comparison, Andromeda is over 98,000 times larger in our sky. Pluto is just too tiny for Hubble to resolve any real detail. That's why sending the New Horizons probe was so important. Everything it sent back was a revelation. On to number 2. Why does Pluto and his big moon Charon orbit around a point in empty space? Not all of you would know that Pluto was doing this, but those who had heard of it might have cause to wonder. Is there something invisible and hugely dense there? Perhaps some kind of tiny lurking black hole. As the New Horizons probe approached Pluto and Charon in 2015, it saw this orbiting phenomenon up close and in detail. But in reality, no black hole explanation is necessary. Scientists were expecting this before New Horizons even arrived, even though they had never detected anything present at that point. This is because everything in space, not just Pluto, orbits around a barycenter. A barycenter is the center of mass between 2 objects. To help visualize this, picture balancing a stick horizontally across your finger, with 2 different weights on either end. Say a nice butternut squash on one end of the stick, and a kiwi on the other end with your finger somewhere in the middle. You can probably intuit it that the butternut is heavier than the kiwi. So you must move your finger on the stick closer to the butternut side, or else the whole stick will topple. This is because for this system, the center of mass is more towards the butternut. For most of the planets with their much greater mass than the moons orbiting them, the center of mass in these situations resides within the planet itself, meaning it wobbles as the moon's gravity tugs on it. With Pluto and Charon, though, they are much more similar in mass, which means the point in which they orbit is outside of Pluto, making it appear like they are swinging around an invisible object in space. The only other place that this happens with all the other big celestial objects in the solar system is surprisingly the Sun and Jupiter. So another enigma about Pluto solved. We've got one last question to go, and I think this perhaps is the biggest question the general public ask about Pluto. It is part a search for answer, part a cry at the injustice of it all, but its answer actually comes with some fascinating nuance. It is, of course, this: why is Pluto not a planet anymore? Before I explain, did you know that we once were considered to have 100 planets in our solar system? It's true. Throughout the ages, the number of planets in our solar system has gone up and down quite a lot. And no, before you ask, this is not because planets suddenly appeared and disappeared, but rather due to how they were discovered. Since antiquity, there were 5 planets beyond Earth, which are the ones visible to the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The ancient Greeks added the Sun and the Moon to their list of planets, but that idea never really caught on. In the late 1700s, Uranus was discovered, which was revolutionary at the time, as no one considered there could be more planets beyond the visible 5. After this discovery, more and more planet candidates were being found, like Ceres, Vesta, Pallas, and Juno, which are all found in what we now know as the asteroid belt, or the large belt of asteroids between the orbit of Mars and Jupiter. But these were not initially listed as asteroids. In science textbooks in the early 1800s, they were all listed as planets. In the middle of the 1800s, Neptune was discovered, and within a few decades, we had quite a list of planets on our hands. There just wasn't a clear distinction between the 8 planets we know today and the large asteroids that were being discovered. By the 1860s, over 100 asteroids had been found, and they were finally given their own distinct classification as asteroids. Asteroids were described as objects that couldn't be distinguished from stars by the fact that they move across the sky. So you might as well ask why Pallas isn't considered a planet or demand justice for Juno. A lot of people in the world feel like Pluto has been hard done by, but Pluto was just another victim of this ruthless refinement of categorization. In 1930, Pluto was discovered, and with the excitement of finding something so large and distant, it was classified as a planet. However, within a few decades, it was discovered that it didn't follow the conventions of traditional planets. The planets we know have circular orbits that align roughly with the plane of the solar system. Pluto, on the other hand, orbits at an angle to the solar system, and his orbit is so elliptical that at some points during its year, it's closer to the Sun than Neptune. But it was also unique, so no one minded it being called a planet. But then, in the 1970s, Pluto was discovered to be a lot tinier than expected. It turned out that its mass is only 1/16 of our moon. This made things a little awkward. Why call Pluto a planet, but not our moon when it was so much bigger than Pluto? Trouble continued for Pluto in the 90s, when telescopic technology had greatly increased and other worlds were being discovered in and around the orbit of Pluto. Just like the discovery of the asteroid belt, it quickly became apparent that there was another belt beyond the orbit of Neptune, now known as the Kuiper Belt. These objects are still being discovered, the most famous ones being AIS, Sedna, Haumea, and MAC. In 2006, the International Astronomical Union knew that something had to be done. It was time to come up with a new definition for the word planet. They finally classified a planet as a celestial body that A is in orbit around the Sun, B has sufficient mass for its self-gravity to overcome rigid body forces so that it assumes a hydrostatic equilibrium or a nearly round shape, and C has cleared the neighborhood around its orbit. So although Pluto fits the bill for the first 2 categories because it lies in the Kuiper Belt, it has not cleared its orbit, and thus is not a planet. I have heard argument that lots of the planets actually have many asteroids in their orbits too, but it is a bit different to have some asteroids around you compared to being in an actual belt. Pluto is instead known as a dwarf planet, which is almost the same except it's not massive enough to have cleared its orbit. We shouldn't see this as a slight against Pluto, but rather because of these new discoveries, we have a whole new category of celestial objects to learn about. Also, because of the classification change, there is a silver lining for the Once Planet series. It got promoted from being an asteroid to becoming a dwarf planet. Better than nothing. So there you have it. 3 questions about Pluto solved. But how many more questions have now arisen? Perhaps as you've thought about the icy beauty of Pluto and learned of its mysteries, all that's happened is it's got your mind turning in even more directions, like the mythical Hydra. Maybe this is a beast that can never truly be slain with just chopping off its heads, but that's part of the beauty of the universe. We can learn so much and there is still so much more to learn. It's the journey that is the most satisfying. Well, that's all we have time for today. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this podcast on facts you may not have known about Pluto. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please feel free to follow us for more podcasts on other fascinating space topics. But for now, I'm Alex McCone, and this has been Astram. All the best, and see you next time.